right. Welcome to episode 48 of the Following Mechanical Turks project. So today we're going to talk about the revisions to the first product. We now have a complete revised draft that's been substantially changed and updated in response to comments. So pretty soon that's going to be posted, because right now mostly it's being developed through Google Docs, and then I had to develop the results section just through Markdown because there's so many figures in it that working with it on Google Docs is sort of counterproductive because you're going to have to deal with those figures at some point anyway. Yeah. So are you still there?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I'm on my iPad, so it worked out. Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, and then I finished up the data collection for the first round of the second product. So the second product has 2 rounds of data collection. The first one was when we were posting individual hits that each sought 5 responses, and there's 40 of them for a total of 200. And those hits were asking people to summarize one of 4 pieces of media in a readable sentence, and it does use that terminology, drawing from the findings in the first product.
Mm-hmm.
And then it asked them 2 questions about the hit itself, dealing with clarity of the instructions and fairness of compensation. Another couple of things that popped out of the first product. So those have now been done. Last time we talked about, because I had wrapped up what was in the initial sort of project or study outline, including the IRB proposal, which was just using sort of the same format to deal with all those 4 different pieces of media. Last time we discussed potentially extending that and submitting an addendum to the IRB. And those jobs had to do with essentially compensation structure. So one of them had to do with the promise of a bonus, right? That's something that came out in the first one. We kind of on the fence about, is it worth dealing with this? And, my thinking ultimately was, it's better to have it and then not need it than the other way around. So many of those jobs dealt with or the new ones, 8 of the new ones. And it's 8 because it's, the 4 pieces of media. And then we have 2 variations of the instructional content. So everything's kind of a production. But those dealt with, they gave, the compensation was $1, which was the lowest compensation we gave, but with the promise of a bonus based on the ranking of the summary that the Turker produced, right? So in the second round, all of those different summaries are going to be essentially ranked through other hits. And the results of those rankings are what we were going to use to provide bonuses. So, the bonus structure is part of, it's common on MTurk, even though it's not, required. It is common there. And so that was something we wanted to address, was the notion of how does this concept of readability, of producing a readable summary, how is it potentially incentivized differently through something like a bonus structure, right? If well, I could get, I'm getting my reward, my $1 reward, which is ample. But, with the promise of, if I really pay attention to this, I have the opportunity to get up to $3, because the bonus structure is broken into 3 tiers. because everything's complicated. So if you're in the bottom third, you get $1, an additional dollar. If you're in the middle third, you get an additional 2. If you're in the top third, you get an additional 3. Which, so you have the potential of getting $4 for this, which is a lot. I mean, in the first product, the average we had was 2 cents a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, this is taking, well, actually, I haven't computed the average yet. It does tell you on MTurk how long the average was per hit. So not per person, but per hit. But anyway, we're talking about, something that's well in excess of minimum wage. So anywho, that was part of them. And then the other ones, we filtered by qualifications, right? So in 32 of those jobs, essentially the hits were just open, just wide open, right?
Yeah.
And that's something we wanted to do because, again, with the first product, it's kind of related to, but not exactly. In the first product, something that came up and something I address in the methods is that a lot of hits can persist on MTurk because they're bad. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that came up, and because of the way we're sampling longitudinally, it's like, well, sometimes you're getting some hits that are sticking around, right? And sometimes it's because those hits need a lot of people or they get reposted because for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because they're bad. No one wants to touch them because either they're poorly compensated or they're unreadable. It's like you look at them, it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about here.
Right.
There are a lot of reasons why they're bad, and so they stick around. And so, a legitimate kind of observation is, well, if you're including those, then this notion of looking at human labor is wrong, because it's like, well, Turkers don't do those because those are garbage. Right. And
but for
what's that?
Yeah, but for us, that's what they decide not to do is an important distinction.
Yeah, and something I try and explain, and I'm not. It seems like sometimes there's still there's still a lack of clarity about this, and it's like, well, no, we need that stuff because what we're looking at is MTurk as a system. You don't get to pick and choose and say, well, I only want the good ones, because it's like, well, no, I mean that's not how this works. You have to look at the thing and take the content that is there. It's awfully biased to say, well, no, I only want the good ones, because then you're getting a very skewed notion of it. You can do it, but what you're doing there is not looking at MTurk. What you're looking at there is Turkers' preferences. That's what you're looking at.
I think that's the language, I think, too, that gets it. Yeah.
And that's the language I use is we're not looking at Turkers' preferences. There's already work in economics that does that, and it is cited in the introduction. So our goal here isn't in this study, what do Turkers like? I mean, that's not this. The goal is, what is the language of hits on MTurk? And that's a different thing. It's a different thing to say, what is the language of hits on MTurk say about human labor? Even if some of those hits don't get picked, that's important. That is important.
Yeah. Well, and what we're getting at too, I think, in the second round is that one of the reasons that they're going unpicked is, to a certain extent, right, the language of the Turk, the clarity of what's after, but also things like compensation. Yeah. So is the hit readable, but also is it worthwhile?
Right.
And given that MTurk is, a labor market, and that notion of automation and heteromation is very much tied to labor, the fact that they're there is it's useful sort of sounding mechanism for how Mechanical Turk is articulating these various concepts of intelligence and human and task, and whether or not they're worth doing is not unimportant to what we're doing. And given, I think, a lot of the the things that are on our reading list and the new sort of introduction that looks specifically at Amazon and the strikes. And, if you're ignoring the economics of this, then you're not really getting a full picture of what's happening inside the system.
Yeah. And I mean, the second move in this first one, where it looks at them in tiers and compensation tiers, moves toward this. The notion of, compensation is a facet of persuasion. I mean, it is a rhetorical facet of, there's a calculus in terms of what's being asked of me here. How long will it take? All of those things are relevant. So the detritus is relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we've wrapped up with the first phase of the second product. I realize how complicated this gets. The second product has these two data collection phases. The first one is now complete, and it includes jobs that address a bonus structure and ones that have qualifications. Yeah, this is how we got on this tangent. Qualifications, right? That 32, so the bulk of those jobs were open, but there are 8 that they're the same thing. They provide $2, so the highest amount of compensation we provided, because these have additional qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And those qualifications are a threshold of the number of jobs, number of hits you've completed, which is over 5,000, which when you say it sounds huge. It's like someone's done 5,000 jobs. Turns out that is very, very common. That 5,000 is not a particularly high bar, which was surprising.
Yeah, that is surprising.
And,
but also, if you think about the compensation levels, it's a volume business.
Yes. And in addition to that, you have an acceptance rate of greater than 98%, which again seems like, wow, that's super high. But Mechanical Turk's own guidance suggests those as like, if you want good results, here's what you use. And so it's kind of a fascinating sort of like bell curve, where it's like, if you get under 98%, you're not worth it. It's like, wow, that seems super high. And you can see why Turkers would be a little sort of like conscientious about it. It's like, well, I don't want to get a rejected hit. I mean, like, even things like choosing what hits to take on.
Right, because if they're even more risk adverse, because if they don't understand the instructions, there's a chance they'll do it wrong, and that will lower their acceptance rate, which will potentially disqualify them from future. It's also interesting too, if you think about the whole artificial intelligence and the notion of automation. From that standpoint, it makes sense that it's 98%, because we're looking for essentially something that's automated. It should be 100% efficiency. That's built into the goal of automation in the first place.
It's interesting, from like it's just sort of interesting, as you say, from like just like almost a disciplinary or field, let's say, where like if you're in this field, and it's like, this is acceptable 98% of the time. That's like, almost a baseline, because that seems shockingly high, even just as an academic. It's like, what's 98%, anything? It's like, when you run an experiment, if it's 98%, it's like, that's super high, it's like.
Right. That's a really, yeah. Whereas if we're looking at something that's got statistical significance, it's really low. But I wondered though, if that's again, volume, right? If your base level is 5,000 hits, a 2% rejection rate starts to become a lot of, starts to become a lot of incomplete or unsuccessfully submitted hits.
Well, and, it also speaks to things like the one sketch hit that you did and someone rejected you, and you're like, I don't know why, because they don't have to explain. The one hit isn't going to matter. That's a drop in the bucket. it's going to be a trend of it, or, something like, it's also why things like you see on third party Turk services, that sort of collaborative stuff, which is mentioned in the first product, the idea that Turkers have self organized, but not unionized. I mean, there's sympathy towards unionization, where they're like, if we try to do something like that, the switch is just going to be shut off. But they definitely have sort of like collective labor structures in place, through things like third-party websites, where they do things like, discuss, is this a good request, or is there, and it's why I got on this tangent, is there the possibility for something like a continued relationship, right?
Right.
I mean, they point out things like, this is one that's, for example, doing these kind of like image recognition jobs or something like that. And it's going to be ongoing, where it's like, this isn't just a one-off hit. This is somebody who's going to continually do this periodically over weeks and months or whatever. Curiously, like our study itself, where I'm posting one of these jobs every day at a rate that is pretty generous.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you get accepted, and because Turk does show you this, some Turkers have done a few of our jobs. It tells you, how many of your hits has this person done? And, that's something we did not want to exclude. We didn't want to say, oh, you've done one of ours before, so you can't do another one again.
Yeah, because if it's a common practice that Turkers become affiliated with requesters, that's something we want to explore.
Right. Yes. And so, all that is to say, if you're doing these hits and it's like your work is acceptable, you're even getting bonuses from that requester, it's like, well, that feels like something that could be an ongoing relationship, right? And so, my work is acceptable. It's a way, not only to get paid, but also there's a kind of comfort, I suppose, in my work is acceptable. So I don't have to worry about doing a one-off hit or whatever and having a bad time,
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, this gets me thinking of our earlier conversations about IRB, right? And their notion of what counts as a human is a kind of vulnerable subject. And the last 10 minutes of our conversation really highlighting the risk averse nature of Turkers, right? Like, I want a hit that's really clear, so there's less risk I'll do it wrong. I'm going to develop a relationship with requesters that I know I have a relationship with, because again, that poses less risk. I don't know, it's a new way that the Turkers themselves are, that sort of risk management becomes a strategy. I don't want to put myself in a position where I'll be negatively affected in some way.
Yeah, negatively affected or wasting my time, right? The sort of calculus is this worth it? Is this worth doing? Because, as you say, this is a volume. If you're getting a few cents, you just can't really waste a lot of time,
Yeah.
Anywho, and all of this stuff is relevant, although we'll see if it's brought to bear, if it manifests explicitly in the study, because some of it may be outside of the boundaries of the particular studies, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing in the first product that was kind of like trying to articulate what that study does and what it does not, because like any other thing, it's susceptible to that kind of creep where, in fact, some of the comments pointed out, it's like, oh, this would be an interesting thing to talk about. And indeed it is. But you just can't do it here, because, if you start pulling at the thread of the weirdness of the original Mechanical Turk itself, its historical and cultural weirdness, the fact that it, is explicitly, and now we have a picture of of a recreation of the Turk that was done in the 80s. Where is that? Hold on a sec. And one of the comments, I think from Kathleen Fitzpatrick, was about the cultural oddness of using a orientalized figure for this. And, she pointed that out and sort of as a comment. It's like, particularly as this pertains to labor, that's probably an interesting topic. And it definitely is, but we can't pull that thread here. It's got to be pulled later, because otherwise the whole paper is going to be that, because it's such a rich and unusual topic. Let me share.
Yeah, there's an interesting piece that came out. In fact, we've we penciled in the author for a session I think that will work for the third product about precisely this issue. So
who is it?
The name is not.
Or what's the stuff?
It looks at sort of automation and Said's Orientalism and it's now, and I don't have my binder in front of me, but
is it the one
anyway?
Yeah, I know. Is it in the reading list?
But all to say, right, that at any given, there's at this stage of the project, there's so many points of departure,
right,
that I don't know if that's going to be in the no, it's a cultural technique. Scroll up. Maybe I'm thinking it's no. Anyway,
right.
We've got it, but it again, it looks at that example of it, and we've reached out to him, but I think we've put it off until we get more into the third product. But yeah, I mean, again, it's and I think that's why I think it was a good move in this revision of the first one to kind of point out that this is a part of something else. I mean, even these conversations, at least 25 to 30% of them just end up being tangents that we put a pin in it to come back around to it later.
Yeah, or it's just the stuff that helps, but that doesn't necessarily manifest, right?
Right.
It's support material, where it's like, you're thinking of the things here, but it may not actually coalesce into that. So yeah, the introduction does kind of point out, and I was showing, so this was built in the 1980s by a person who makes magical props, as in it's someone who makes gear for magicians. And so he, his name was John, is it Goggin or Gauguin? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, he's out in Los Angeles, right? He's a prop maker. Yeah.
So this is a recreation of it. It uses the original chessboard, which was stored separately, so it didn't get destroyed in the fire that destroyed the original one.
Huh.
But when you look at this, and see, I kind of liked this because there are renderings of the original Turk. I don't know if there's a photo of the original Turk.
I don't think so.
I mean, technologically, it would have been possible, but I've never found a photo of it. I've seen drawings of it.
Yeah.
But this is kind of interesting.
And those drawings were speculative, right? They were. I think, and if I'm stepping on your line, I apologize, right? That in many ways, the only reason that we know how the mechanical Turk might have worked is because of the decisions this guy had to make in reproducing it.
No, I didn't go that far into it. I mean, I don't know if von Kempelen left schematics or
No. Yeah, this guy was sort of guessing. If I were to do, that's why the fact that he makes these kinds of things is probably was only someone like him could do it, because he had to think of it. If I were trying to do this trick, how would I build this cabinet? So it's a speculative reproduction, but it probably gives us our best sense of how it would have worked, because there were only sketches, right? There weren't any schematics, precisely because I don't think von Kempelen would have wanted schematics to get out, right? You wouldn't. You'd closely guard those at best.
It's not too far from like the occasional, although these are more detailed, like the occasional Da Vinci. It's like, well, hey, we built that weird screw helicopter, that he has pictures of. Anywho,
or other. I mean, I'm thinking of when there was recently
The Babbage
in
reconstruction and all that.
there was a mummy exhibit currently in St. Louis. And there's one of the exhibits is they have Egyptian mummies, but also like accidental mummies, cadaver mummies. And one of the mummies they had was two Egyptologists in the 80s that used a guy that donated his body to science. And they were trying to figure out precisely how the Egyptians would have done mummification. And the way they learned it is they tried to reproduce it.
Yeah.
So a kind of speculative reconstruction that's not designed to simply mimic the results. It's trying to sort of practically learn, okay, what would they have done at this stage? So it was mostly an exercise in learning how the Egyptians would have done it, less an attempt to simply recreate a mummy.
Yeah, there are activities like that, or medieval medicine. There are some things based on that, like making a topical antibiotic. And it was curious because it involved things that seem alchemical, like, oh, this needs to be in a copper vessel. And now we know, oh, yes, copper is naturally antimicrobial. Copper and silver, copper in particular now is being like installed in hospitals on doorknobs and fixtures because it naturally kills microorganisms.
Wow.
And so it's interesting because it's like, all those weird magical things, like we got to do it under the light of a moon and you got to put it in this kind of thing. It's like some of that crap actually mattered. And they didn't realize this until they did it.
You needed copper and high tide. It's not going to work without that gravitational force and the antimicrobial properties of copper.
Yeah. Anywho, I mean, that picture is in there because it illustrates some of this. It's like another thing where we're kind of talking about it's based on the Turk, and it's like you can't really just say. I mean, I don't think you communicate. There's a paragraph of text, and they're saying, well, it's this this device that was purported to be, and I realized like we didn't even describe, oh yeah, it's a guy wearing a turban. And it's like that's kind of important, like it's like when you look at that picture, it's like, yeah, this is weird. And all those cultural issues of like if you tried to make this today and wandered around saying this is my automatic chest plane thing, you'd be like, that's a real big problem what you've just done, and so, yeah, I mean, I thought the picture was useful for a lot of reasons. But then, yes, I mean, it explicitly says in the introduction, it's like there are all these threads that are obviously too big for one piece. And that's why we created the project. Yeah. It explicitly says that's why we created this project, to look at some of these different facets. And then the new methods starts with kind of a brief overview of what the project is before turning to the Brown and the theoretical orientation. Anywho, so that first product is, I still have stuff to go over, but then I'm gonna post that, and I'm gonna need you to go over, because even once I post it, I have to work in all the video clips. Yeah. And I have the clips, I mean, I made them, but they have to be posted and then kind of explicated, because I think Jeff wanted more sort of like explicit connection between the clips and the text, right? I mean, in sort of the current draft, they're there, but I think Jeff and possibly some reviewers that Jeff synthesized. Yeah, it's like, well, those are there, but for one thing, they right now point to time codes, which is kind of administratively, oh man, I pinched a nerve in my back and it keeps not helpful that I sit for 18 hours a day in a question mark shape on an oval computer. But it's useful administratively, because then it's like, well, it's the same file, but we're pointing to different things. But for example, there's no return. It's like, as Jeff was kind of pointing out, it's like, well, there are these links, but they just go to a point in a 2-hour video or whatever. And then you don't know, like, well, how do I get back, Yeah. And so not only the clips now are, a minute or whatever, but also sort of textual integration, maybe, you know what I mean? It's like when you click on it and the video comes up, I envision those things as working sort of similar to footnotes, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, and here we are talking to Kathleen or Jim or Casey or whomever about these points, and here's what's going on in there. So that
Yeah.
it's more sort of like those things are more meshed together. They don't even have to be like conversational, but it's just sort of like it explicates, right? Here's what's going on in this, and here you go.
They need captions, or in the same way you treat figures. They need, here's why you're watching this, and here's what to take away from it.
Yeah, and even more, I think, more footnotey than captiony. And
Okay.
the originals have those, but they're very, the ones that are there now are kind of captiony, where it's like, here the authors discuss, the Turk name with Minsu Kang, right? Where it's like descriptive, but as a reader, you're like, an appropriate response would be like, well,
right. So what?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, so I think they need to be a little bit more like, here's what we were talking about, blah, blah, blah. So, they need to be worked up more.
Okay. Yeah,
so,
I can do that.
Well, yeah. So, well, that's one thing. Yeah. I can post those videos where they go. But that's certainly something we can do, is figure out how to integrate them,
Yeah.
And then, I'll need you to go over the finished product, because, I'm too close. I can't look at this thing anymore.
Yeah.
It's starting to, at that point when you look at it too much, it starts to lose coherence and meaning, where it's like, I don't know if I'm reading this or if my eyes are just going over it. It's a longer piece. In terms of word count.
Yeah. We cracked 10.
Huh?
Have we cracked 10?
Oh, easily.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. The first section is about 25. Yeah, a couple sections are 3,000. The results is 4,000, and that's not including. It's not including figures, So like in page count, although I did hack a lot of the figures out. One of the things is with a lot of the figures, it just sort of starts to wash over you, where it's like, and then there's this one, and then there's this one, and then there's this one. There's still some of that. I think the results can probably still be cut down, but again, I'm not sure I'm the best one to hold the knife at this point.
Okay.
But we chopped out 10 of the figures. We did add a couple more, but like the introduction now has those 3, because it has a picture of the "We Are Not Robots" sign. It has a picture of the Turk. It also has a screen capture of the interface, which is another thing commenters said. They're like, you need to have a picture of the interface here. It would. You
should really probably say what MTurk is. Well,
and show, because it's like you're talking. It's the old sort of, describe a spiral versus doing this, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to, with words, describe what a spiral is. You can take your finger and do it in a second. Same thing's true here. It's like, rightly, reviewers are like, I'm not quite sure what you're discussing here.
Yeah.
So I think the picture is like, okay, well, here's what it is. And then you can also see some of the jobs. And the jobs are, I did have to tweak what jobs to include, because some of them tipped their hand about, like, I wanted to kind of preserve anonymity. Still not exactly. Yeah. Like I redacted request their names, but like the jobs that are there now, there's only 3 because it includes the description. But it's like one of them is find a hotel's actual email address. One of them, I think, is like fill out this marketing survey. And then the third is circle these pictures of human rights violations. Yeah, it's like this weird. It's like, well, there you go. That's MTurk,
Jeez, yeah, that's a nice representative spread.
Yeah, one that got clipped that I also wanted to include had to do with COVID, but it didn't fit on the screen. Basically, just sort of a give and take about how big I could make and have it be legible. But
the circle human rights violation is probably akin to the, the insurance app, point to damage on the car.
Well, it says human rights AI. You won't be able to see this too well because the image is small on Google Docs. Will be larger in the thing itself, but you can see it's like find the official email address of a hotel, market research survey, excuse me, human rights AI, trace polygons around officers and their equipment. Right?
Interesting.
This is data for an AI to track police. So again, this is a machine learning algorithm.
Yeah.
To track police use of force in America. This hit right here is itself a paper.
Yes. No.
Using,
Right.
using AI, using humans to train a visual recognition AI to spot police brutality.
Yeah.
This is for Casey, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
using the techniques of seeming oppression. It's like, well, we can use those too. It's like you can use the surveillance too.
No, it's very much right. His sensing commons and that whole, the ubiquitous citizenship. You just have your phone going,
right?
And you become a sensor for police. Oh man, yeah, you're right. That's a whole.
Well, and there's been, I believe the young woman, but fact check this, the young woman who video recorded the
George Floyd.
Yeah, the George Floyd murder. I believe she won a Pulitzer Prize.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And, there was some mild discussion about, because she isn't, as far as I understand, wasn't a professional reporter. This is just very much right place, right time. But, there's no argument against the significance of what was done there, right? In terms of that video and the now expanding role of video. A lot of the conversation that came out of this, and it's like, well, why is there all of a sudden this renewed focus on civil rights, particularly involving African Americans? And it's like, we've been telling you this, African Americans have said, we've been telling you this for decades, but now we've got video of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like the surveillance of it, can be used for social justice, right? It's not simply a tool of oppression.
Yeah. I think it was I can't remember if it was like a special category or maybe a new category, or because I think it had in it was a recognition of citizen journalist, or I think something along those lines. But yeah.
I'm Darnella Frazier, who recorded video of George Floyd's death on the Pulitzer Prize. Yeah. But it's interesting in a sense because it's like, it's also a signal that it's more than just the single journalist, right? We think of those individual awards as is always the case with an individual award. It's like, well, I did something powerful, and to people's credit, they always acknowledge, well, it's like, I didn't do this alone, right? There's a network of people behind that are making this possible. And in a sense, this kind of award acknowledges, it's like, in a lot of cases, there's going to be 50 people with phones. The award is in part going to the camera, the pervasiveness of citizen surveillance. In a part, you can see Time Magazine, for example, saying our person of the year is camera surveillance, as they do.
They're like, social media based camera surveillance, right? Because you'd all write a networked camera or something like that. Yeah.
And in sort of a materialist way, it's like, it's not just the camera either. It's also the social construct of, we tape everything, right?
Right.
The camera itself is not enough. It's also the politics of, we tape everything now, and it's mocked as people do it in concerts and miss out on the concert. But it's the social construction hand in hand with the technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anywho.
Yeah, it's I don't know. You need a back rub, buddy?
It's not going to do it, man.
Yeah.
Yesterday, it was like a lightning bolt hit me. One of those
But
ones where I couldn't even lie down because changing any kind of posture. There was a point where I managed to get on the floor, and I was like, how am I going to get back up?
oh,
It was bad. It's still bad.
yeah. But to go back to that video, I mean, it's not, I mean, this is a third product thing, but right, it's not, it's a kind of heteromation, right? It's a kind of, it'd be interesting to link that kind of camera evidence as a descendant of CCTV footage,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a kind of heteromated version of, yeah. Anyway, it's
Well, it associates with things we've already got in our notes for that third thing about cultural techniques.
Yeah.
Things like Be My Eyes, right? Which is a benign example of, so this is a service that people who are visually impaired, if they go grocery shopping, they can use this app, point their phone at the shelves, and it connects you with someone who can look at that and say, oh, that's showing the milk or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? And like, that's an example of this kind of productive use. And then at the other end of the spectrum is people being worried about, yes, CCTV. I mean, you hear that in the UK more than you do here about, like, we're constantly surveilled in the UK. And although it's present here as well, it's just, we're geographically dispersed.
right. Right.
And then, in between those poles, there's all this other stuff where it's like,
Yeah.
the pervasiveness of the camera and our social relationship with it.
Yeah. Because you can think then about the need for this now machine learning for that third hit. Because I mean, your average BBC crime drama is just 80% of the job just seems to be sitting in front of monitors watching CCTV footage.
Right.
So if you could be great if we could train a bot to go and be able to spot, which they do, right? I mean, suspicious behavior, right? Gait analysis and that kind of stuff, right? Now, all these machine learning things that now are essentially being developed to deal with the infinite amount of video footage.
And the potential to do it in with low latency, so it could happen as it occurs, right?
Yeah.
If you could see I mean, and this is the surveillance dream of, the camera can see a crime in progress, acknowledge it as a crime, and intervene, right? Where it's like, well, we send officers there because the camera knows that this is a mugging, right?
Right.
And potentially here as well, the camera sees this is police, the camera has just seen an officer cover his or her badge with his or her hand, right?
Yeah.
So we know this is funny business.
Yeah.
So, anywho, I mean, that's the gist of where we are now. I mean, the good news is the first product, which again, the comments were really good. And, I think as far as I understood it, the big comment was the lack of contextualization, right? That there just wasn't really an acknowledgement of where the audience was coming from. And, they need context about like what this thing is, why you should care. And so I think, a lot of that work going on in the introduction helps. The methods section pulls in much of the material of the results. And I think does it in a way that isn't too, because we set up the original draft the way it was because it's a little weird to kind of ping back and forth in terms of, because we have those three sections, we're looking at the corpus, the tiers, and then individual feature connections. It's a little odd to do like all the methods and say, okay, here's what we do in each, and then to get to the results and be like, okay, now do you remember the thing I talked about previously? I think it's structured now in a way that it's okay, in part because like a lot of the methods stuff is, I think, kind of nitty gritty-ish, where it's like, if you don't, there's a point at which is like, if you're reading through the methods section, you're like, I don't really I don't really care about this. You can just skip it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can get through it like it's all right, fine. I read that, but I don't really care about chi-squared measurements or know what really they are, but I acknowledge they're there. And then the results is much more, okay, here's what the stuff is, you know?
Mhm.
So those were adjusted, and then the conclusion and results have been adjusted. I'm still a little, because, you know, the way that the results, excuse me, the discussion of the conclusion, the way the results function, you know, it points out, okay, well, here's what stuff here. I like the bulk of the discussion, which is mostly the stuff you wrote about readability and trauma and essence, right?
Yeah.
I like that, and I feel it fits better as discussion than it would as conclusion. There were some comments that it's like this matter because it's more of an extrapolation.
Right. Yeah. We
In
talked
some
about this
way.
last time that, yeah.
And I acknowledge that, and yet I'm not quite certain that makes it the conclusion, because it ends in a place that there isn't really then a sew up of, you know, well, so, okay, so now what? So
Mhm.
currently it is still results. I mean, essentially what happened is we took most of the short conclusion, put that at the start of the results discussion, because it's much more of like just a dry synthesis of, okay, so here are the main themes that popped out.
Mhm.
And then it turns to extrapolation. And then the now conclusion, it points towards subsequent studies.
Yeah.
So
Which I think makes sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it makes sense again, given, I mean, the rub with the conclusion is similar to the one with the introduction, which is this is a part of a planned sequence of pieces. And so our conclusion, you know, I mean, sometimes a conclusion might say, here's some additional work that can be done. But our conclusion is like, here's something that's already half done that's coming soon.
Yeah, and it's not quite as explicit about that as it could be. And I don't know if that's something to change or not, because
Yeah, it may not be worth it.
Well, that's why I need other people to read this, right?
Yeah.
Because it's still like, if you look at it here, let me make this practical. So now the conclusion is brief. I mean, it was previously brief, but you know, it still is. And it points to, okay, so here's what we've done in the first paper. And then it, you know, says readability is something that popped out here because, you know, the second piece really is about readability.
Yeah.
And so this next piece is going to do this. I mean, you know, it points
Yeah.
to it. But we'll have to see. It's like, you know, to what level do we want to talk about what's going to be in that second thing? You know, we have a better
probably
handle
not.
on.
Yeah, it strikes me that paragraph does it. I mean, right, this shift in topic invites a commensurate change in methods, moving from text mining to experimentation. Our subsequent study in this, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty clear marker that this isn't speculative. This is
Yeah.
a description of what's happening and what will result from it.
Yeah. And it makes a final gesture to the overall thing of moving toward
Yes.
the third look at sort of how it, and it says this earlier, but it comes back here, how, you know, it is itself a kind of theory mechanism, right? I mean, the platform itself theorizes in particular ways.
Yeah.
So anywho, I should have that what's today, Friday? I'll have it posted. I mean, definitely sometime next week. It kind of depends because I'm going through stuff now and, you know, still kind of untangling. It's like, is what is there as effective as it could be or not? But anywho, I'll get that posted and then we can go from there.
Okay.
The second thing, the next step now is round 2. So I've already tinkered with Qualtrics, which we have a site license for, and I figured out how to do what we want to do. It did necessitate posting a question to the forums that you get access to by being a subscriber. But I did get a nice, polite, helpful answer. It took a couple days, which normally it's like if it doesn't happen immediately, it's not going to happen. It's like Stack Overflow. This is just going to be a zombie question if someone doesn't answer it immediately.
Right. They got a shelf life.
They do. Yeah, they do have a shelf life. But anywho, the question had to do with, so we've got for each, so the way it works is for each of the 4 pieces of media, we have 50 summaries now. Some of those summaries came from, this gets so complicated. I have a tree diagram of this. But
no doubt.
For each piece of media, there are 2 hit descriptions and titles. Okay. And then for each of those, there are then the 3 tiers of compensation for each of the 2 descriptions, $1, $1.50, $2. And then there are also the $2 ones that have additional qualifications required. Oh, and something we didn't talk about is the interestingness of the qualifications, which is, and I texted you about this, but it's definitely something to talk about in the second product, which is we use those 2 threshold things of number of hits and acceptance rate. There's one that Amazon has pushed called, is this person a master? And it's just a box you check. It's different than the others. And, I was like, what? Yeah. And so I looked into it, and it's a qualification that's sort of in typical nebulous Amazon language. It's like, we look at a range of factors to determine whether someone's a master or not. And then if you look on Turker resources, there's conversations about how do you get this? And interestingly, now they're usually a couple of years old because this is a older push. Amazon tried to supplant those explicit number of hits and threshold with master. They didn't want people to use those anymore. They just wanted you to say masters. And what's interesting is like Turkers are like, this is opaque. We have no idea. Like,
right.
I've got tens of thousands of jobs. I have a 100% acceptance rate, or round up to 100. Why am I not one of these? And then there's like conversations like, I contacted Amazon and they couldn't give me a straight answer, or didn't. And then someone's like, I know somebody at Amazon and they say this is utterly arbitrary. It's a lottery. If you come up, and we decide you're okay, then we give it to you. It's like the notion of opacity and transparency is an utterly fascinating conversation about Amazon tried to make this the default, where it's like, well, no, we'll handle the notion of, is this person good or not? Again, it's on a thing named for hiding labor.
Yeah. Again, what did you expect?
And they're hiding the sort of, Star Chamber-esque. It's like, how did you get this qualification? Leave that up to us,
Yeah. Pay no attention to the man. Yeah. It literally is David Copperfield. Like, yeah. Again, this is a service based on a magic trick.
Yeah.
With racially suspect coding.
Yeah. And other problems. But
yeah.
But anywho, so like there was kind of this push to do that. And it seems like it didn't, I don't think there was necessarily resistance so much as people just didn't do what they wanted, what Amazon wanted them to do.
I mean, I would assume it was just requesters.
Yeah, didn't want to.
I could see that this would be as much trouble for requesters as it would be for Turkers. Like, no, I don't. What's a master? I want someone that's done 10,000 hits.
Yes. I mean, there's a clarity in that, even if you can dispute the fairness of like the acceptance rate, where it's like, well, that's out of Turker's hands. You can get a bad requester who's just a jerk or whatever, or is a computer. But at least there's a clarity, right? I mean, it's the old lie of numbers. I mean,
right.
They are lies, yes, but 5 and 4 are different things, and 5 is a bigger number.
They are lies, but maybe not as worse a lie as master or not.
Yeah, and there's a notion of that they're a different kind of deception, right? I mean, anyway.
Right.
So I mean, I didn't really thoroughly research this, but looking into it, it seems like people just didn't do it. Like requesters didn't like, no, I'm just going to stick with this. And Turkers didn't seem to have any affection for it because it was opaque and limited what jobs they could do and that kind of thing.
Right.
It's still there, but they haven't, at least Amazon hasn't unilaterally just said, no, that's all you get. You know, we're just going to take away the other qualifications. In
Right.
part because Amazon likes them, also because some of them they charge for, right? Some
Oh, I
qualifications.
see.
Some qualifications they'll let you apply for free, but others that are like fancier ones, you have to, as a requester, pay an additional fee for. Anywho,
Which is probably why they potentially the motivation for why they, yeah.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows? But so anywho, each of the four media has now 50 summaries written by Turkers, and they're in those categories of there's two different hits that we made in order to kind of look at the readability of producing the hit, right?
Right.
And then there's also the compensation differences, and then the high compensation with qualifications, and then the low compensation with the promise of a bonus. But basically, you know, what we wanted was a big pool of summaries for each of the four media. That's what we wanted, and that's what we've got. Pool is 50. And then what we're going to have in the second round now is people basically rank those, but we can't have them rank 50.
50, right.
That's, you know, that's
cost prohibitive.
No,
at least.
well, you can't ask someone to do that. I mean, psychometric.
Yeah.
Particularly things that are that close. If you say, hey, rank these almost identical summaries for me.
Yeah.
You know, that's it's maddening. And also the results you get would be, it's, you know, because after the first four, you'd be like, I don't, you know.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're giving them 4 from the pool. And that's an easier task. Rank these 4. It's not even rank. It's pick the most readable one.
That's right. That's right.
It's not ranked choice voting. It's just pick, you know, the easiest possible job here. And then here's the strength of scaled automation, right? You select 4 many times, probably about 500 times. That way, each one is going to be seen 10 times. I was told there's no math. The ones that are most readable will bubble to the top, right? I mean, that's the theory of how this works. But yeah, so the trick was what we needed in Qualtrics was precisely that. We need you to pull 4 out of this pool of 50, but it can't be random, because if it's random, then some of them are going to get shown. I mean, that's how random works. Is one of them is going to get shown 50 times. One of them is going to get shown twice. So it has no way to win, right? So it can't be random. What you have to do is shuffle the deck and then peel off 4, 4, 4 until you get to the bottom of the deck. You know?
Yeah.
That's what you have to do. Qualtrics can do that. That's the good news. Yeah, I know. Because I mean, but again, it's like that's precisely why something like Qualtrics is built, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's built. Anyone can do a random survey. This is built because it can do stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
It basically just has a box you can check where it's like, do you want me to make sure that everyone is shown an equal number of times? And I'm like, yes, that's precisely what I want you to do.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, not only does it do that, but it actually shows you the precise numbers, because, you know, if you have, I mean, we've got 4, 50 is not tidally divisible by 4, right? So it's like you can't actually show them an equal number of times, but I can get as close as I possibly, you know, the differences will be 1 or 2, and I'll give you the actual totals, so that if you need to do a quick a percentage calculation of this got picked X number of times, but it was only shown Y number of times, right? Even though those numbers are going to be super close, you can still manually tweak so that it's based on percentage rather than raw numbers. Anywho, so that problem appears to be solved. So the next step there will be, I need to take those 50 responses, pop them into a question, and then set this up. And something we'll have to talk about maybe next time, also because, yeah, we do need to talk about this now. So one thing is those bonuses come from that ranking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the hit, I pointed out, I was like, it may take a couple of weeks for you to get your bonus because we have to do the second thing to get the ranking.
Right.
Now, the problem is I'm going to be out of town from the 10th to the 24th, and I won't really have internet access. It'll be spotty. And so the takeaway is I don't think I want to start this before and then interrupt it halfway through with this trip. And so, but I also don't want Turkers to have to wait the whole time for these results to come back. Could be a month later and they're like, oh yeah. So what I'm thinking I might do, and I did put this in the IRB, the addendum. I said, if it's going to take too long, more than a couple of weeks, I think I'm just going to give everybody the full bonus because I don't want to inconvenience them,
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't affect the data because the issue was always the incentive of the reward, right?
Right.
It's not the incentive is not what you get paid, it's what you could get paid. Right. So whether you get the highest or the lowest, I mean, do you remember when we were talking to Kagel? And she was like, just pay them. She was like, they've already done what you want them to do, just pay them. I mean, that was sort of what I was like, well, yeah, it's not the reward itself, it's the promise of the reward. That's what actually influenced your composition, So I think I might just pay out the full reward, the full bonus to everybody, because it in a sense, it doesn't impact things.
Right.
And I don't want them to have to wait until I'm in internet range to start doing this again,
Yeah. Plus, they're being compensated the most we can for the work that they've done.
Right. I mean, I don't think anyone would complain, hey, you gave me the highest bonus that you said you could,
Yeah.
No one complains about that.
So what you're saying is for maybe the first time, we're actually using we have to get this whole bonus situation worked out perfectly.
The first time in history, the bonus situation will be worked out, presumably to everyone's satisfaction, because everyone's just going to get the highest bonus. And, we're talking about, I think it's, we're talking about $160 tops here. So,
yeah,
because it's 40 hits basically of the 200.
Yeah.
Anywho, and all that is to say, I don't think I'm going to set up that second round and fire it off next week, because I'm going to be out of here next week. And I don't want to set that, because we're also going to have to do some prelim tests just to make sure everything works before opening the floodgates, because this will literally be like 4 jobs, each with 500, open hit slots.
Yeah. And I'm going to guess that probably will happen quickly. I would assume, given potentially the compensation rate and the idea that potentially we have Turkers who are following this.
Yeah, and for this one, the compensation is 50 cents because you're just picking, you're not writing that. You're just picking the most readable from these 4. You get the media, you get the 4 choices, and you pick it. The other thing, though, to discuss would be, because in its current format, those other 2 questions are retained about is this fair, and you do have to provide a sentence of why, and is it the instructional content lucid, basically, and why. And in that first round, we ask people to do that, and we ask for a sentence explaining their answer.
Yeah.
And part of that was there are few enough of those that we can actually look through those responses. I mean, there's 200. That's not crazy, where you can look through, and I shouldn't say crazy. You can look through those responses once you get results about like, oh, okay, well, this group, their average in terms of fairness is this, and here's what they say about it. When we scale that up for the second round, there's no way you could look through 2,000 of those and get a real like arms around sense of it. I mean, curiously, what we could do is run more text mining, but I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to do it. So the question kind of becomes, do we even retain? I think I like having those rating questions, but do we retain the sentence? Part of that was also just to make sure it's like a human who also speaks English, right?
Right.
Because we need that for you to make a reasonable determination of which one is most readable. You have to be able to read English, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that compose a sentence of explanation on those last two questions was a check, right?
Yeah.
So now we have to decide, do we want to retain that there? Because there's a sense in which the actual sentence is superfluous in the sense of reading it. It's not superfluous in the sense of it being a check.
Yeah.
But also, if you're getting 50 cents for it, 3 multiple choice questions is not a big deal. 3 multiple choice questions and writing 2 sentences is a little bit of a bigger deal,
Yeah. Are there other mechanisms in place that would do the screening that short answer question's doing?
Potentially. I mean, even there may even be qualifications. I mean, that's another thing is, like, if we flip on qualifications, it may reduce the pool. But if we're talking about people who've like done 5,000 and have a 98%, there's a lower chance that, that's a bot or whatever. And there may also be questions like, or qualifications like speaks English,
Yeah.
I haven't looked. But that might be a qualification. There may be ways around that notion of it just being a check. There's also the issue of, say it's not a check. That might be fine as well, where it's like, yeah, some bots and some non-native speakers slipped in this second round. That's not that big of a deal. That's part of the
system. Yeah,
that is the system. One of the works we cite in the first product is about a couple of years ago. There was this potential crisis that in the social sciences, that it looked like they were getting a lot more bot responses for academic. This is published scholarship. It's like, this looks like a lot of bot stuff. They're still not really sure, but there was sort of this mini crisis of, well, maybe the well is run dry here in Turk, that it's like, we can't really do this anymore because it's too body. But it's like, part of the article is just like, yeah, but that's what this is. There's a give and take between, but that's also true with freshmen.
Yeah, I mean, right. You're
10% of those freshmen are just doing this, I mean, they don't care.
No, it's as a possible tangent. The piece that I wrote in QJS with Martin Dirksen, the social psychologist from the Netherlands that we met at the Andy Clark.
Years ago.
Yeah, the part of the work that we were doing is how much work social psychologists have to do to turn participants into essentially bots that will then generate predictable human behavior.
Right.
Like all the work they do in designing studies is precisely to control for variables.
Right.
And essentially, if you want to understand the human mind, you have to do a lot of work to get them to perform that role for you.
Well, isn't that a big Latourian thing, that it's like you have to regiment the human subject to give you that, there's a way in which the object is less of an object than the human subject. Am I mistaking this? Where he's like, because the human response is so conditioned when you're studying them. There's a sense in which they're more of an object than the rock, which is just rocking the whole time.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think so. I think that sounds right. Right. That weirdly enough, you're getting less resistance from the human subject.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I think.
Yeah. Because oftentimes, right, that a lot of these studies, they want particular kinds of resistance, right? I mean, that's why they very rarely let a participant know what they actually want, because most subjects will try to then do that. The good participant is a big problem sometimes in these kinds of studies. So,
and there's always a sort of reciprocity of, to what degree am I just spoon feeding them? It's like, this is, no, I don't want you to eat the marshmallow right now. I mean, if you want to study about, willpower, you can definitely structure it, and put in the instructions, hey, don't eat this marshmallow because I'm going to give you 2 marshmallows in 5 minutes. And you'll get a huge effect where people don't eat that first marshmallow, but it's because you've channeled them like water into a particular response,
Right. Yeah, no, it turns out, I mean, this was a big,
particularly if you deny that, if they reach for the first marshmallow and you slap their hand, you'll get a 100%, what effect that you wanted to see if you force them into it,
Well, this was a big problem in social psychology. There was a famous social psychologist that basically got caught guaranteeing particular results because, as will come as a surprise to nobody, you get the answers that you get from the question that you ask. It's unavoidable to design a study that doesn't ultimately generate what all you've learned is this is what happens when people are tested this way. And so there's this big crisis. So are any of our results valid or useful if all we've demonstrated is this is what you can get volunteers to do in a study if you arrange the study this way? There's no broader applicability.
Right. Anywho, and we're going way over. So that's the gist. I mean, right now we're pretty good spot. Next thing is probably that first product stuff, and the second round of the second product. I think will come. I think it'll be a couple of weeks because I just don't see being able to do this before I'm out of contact. And I don't want it run. What's that?
Just squeezing it in time.
Yeah, and I don't want it running while I'm not able to at least check in on it, Uh-oh, you've frozen up for me.
Oh.
That's a sign. All right, well, I'll wrap it up.
All right, am I back at all?
Yeah, I mean, elements of you are. Some coherent pattern. All right, well,
it's the best anybody can hope for.
Yeah. All right, well, so that's the gist of it. I'll let you know when I get those things posted on the Manifold site.
Yeah, I'll work on those video, not captions so much as footnotes. I like the helpful distinction.
Well, and okay, so you know what I can do is, because I have the clips, and right now in Google Docs there are comments that say what clip goes with what language.
Okay.
So if I give you access to the clips, you can match them up.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, I'll see you.
Okay.